I'm very pleased to be joined by Dolly Williams, CEO of A. Williams Construction, a member of the City Planning Commission, and Frank Sciame, CEO of F.J. Sciame Construction Company, a leading figure in the New York construction industry. Welcome to Citywide.
Thank you.
Frank, there's an old saying that New York would be a great city if it was ever finished. From the amount of construction that I see going on around town, it looks like we're making that effort to finish New York. Tell us what's going on in the industry generally.
At this point, we are seeing unprecedented construction activity and volume. I don't think that we've ever seen this kind of volume in such a short period of time. I mean, the New York Building Congress, which I was a chairman not long ago, puts out a forecast on construction, and we're looking at 3 years of unprecedented construction volume.
Dolly, very often the projects that you get involved with, you're doing the excavation work. It's literally getting in at the ground floor, creating the foundation for the building. Do you see any slowdown in the pace of projects around the city?
Not at all, and not in the near future as well. And I have to agree with Frank, but I think that not only the next 3 years, but I see it 10 years from now still being busy, because this New York City is a magnet for developers and people who want to be here and do business here, and so we see people coming with money, and every block you drive onto into the city, you see another crane sitting there. I see this happening for a little while longer than 3 years. Sorry, Frank.
But you've both been in the business for some time, and it wasn't always this way. I mean, the city had a building boom in the late 80s, and then it sort of dried off. I remember in the early 90s, the construction unions having big rallies at City Hall demanding that work be created because there was nothing for them to do. What has changed, and particularly what has changed since 9/11? You know, because at that point it wasn't entirely clear whether people were willing to invest in New York.
I think the perception, I think that the city did a great job in terms of leading everyone to believe that New York City, and in particular Lower Manhattan, is coming back. And it took 5 years, but what we're looking at now, in a 1 square mile area of Lower Manhattan, I think it's between $30 to $37 billion worth of work that's going to be built in the coming years. So I think the perception was changed, and it led to confidence by all people, developers, buyers, New York City, in New York City individuals, and it really made a difference.
There's a lot of talk about the cost of doing business in New York, and particularly in the construction industry. In fact, Deputy Mayor Dan Doctoroff is in the middle of a study now of trying to figure out what can be done about construction costs. Is it a complicated regulatory environment? Do you find it difficult to be able to just do your jobs? Dolly?
Well, I think regulations, and I think this administration has been working on reducing regulations so that we can drive costs down. But I think it's other things as well. Doing business in this city is costly because it's a union town, and the unions, and it's the right way to go, I believe. So that would be one of the reasons why the costs are up. And then the location also. I mean, when you can have 10 truckloads coming out of a place where you don't have so much traffic, here you have 2 trucks coming in and out. So I think it's location, it's some of regulation, it is also, I think location more than anything else in the city itself. In the outer boroughs, I think the cost can be a little bit less, where you have more open space, where you can move freer.
If there was one thing about the sort of the environment in which you operate that you would change, what would that be?
Traffic.
Well, no, I guess if you got a truck full of cement and you can't get it to your job site, that's a real factor. What about you? If there was one thing you could change about the construction business in New York, what would it be?
What would it be? I think I'd like to be appreciated more.
Well, that too.
And I'm not speaking for myself, but I think that, as Dolly said, this is one of the most challenging cities to work in. And I think that regulations, while they are trying to be relaxed, I think that's a good thing. You need them. I mean, safety is so important. When you look at the amount of work that goes on under such difficult conditions, and the rate of accidents, fatal accidents, being as low as they are, I think that's a real tribute to city regulations and to the construction industry in general.
The city has made some efforts to try and streamline that. The buildings department has gone for more computerization. They've revised the building code to bring it more in line with national standards. But people very often complain about the buildings department. Do you think does it receive the attention that it needs, and what are the other steps, from a practical level, do you think can be done to?
I think that any large bureaucratic department will be criticized, but I think that Patricia Lancaster has done an outstanding job in a short period of time, not only to try and revise the code, but to streamline the process in terms of getting building permits and whatnot. And I'll tell you, I'd rather go in for a building permit in New York City than some small village in the outer boroughs or
outside of the city.
Outside of the city.
It has always been a little complicated to get building permits, and I think the reason why we have to be so careful, because we see people doing all kinds of crazy things. As Frank said, safety is our main issue. You do not have a successful project if you have accidents. So I think the key to the whole thing, and regulations are good, sometimes very good, because of the safety issue.
There have also been allegations about corruption in the construction industry. Some of the unions that are involved have had there are issues, allegations of kickbacks. There was one point where many of the interior companies that do work in office buildings were suspect, to the point where in the Giuliani administration he proposed licensing everyone in the construction business for character and fitness in the same way that they license people in the private karting industry. Is there pervasive corruption in the construction industry?
I don't know too much about that. I wouldn't know too much about that.
I know enough.
Try not to know about that.
I know enough about the honesty in the industry to speak to that. Look, there are always going to be a few bad apples, okay? And generally, it's the smaller contractors who are struggling in a tough business, and desperate people will do desperate things. But by and large, when you talk about the larger contractors in this town, I have never seen, and I'm not just saying this, and I'm sure Dolly, you could agree to this, some of the most outstanding construction executives, honest, hardworking, trying to do the right thing. If you could put a statistic on this, I bet it would be in the 1/10 of 1% in terms of the amount of volume that goes on in this town that happens to be corrupt.
In some ways, construction is the most local of industries, because you're digging in a hole in the ground and you're putting a building up, and that building's not going anyplace anytime soon. But globalization seems to be having an impact on the business. Everything from the cost of capital, the money that you need to borrow to finance a project, to the price of steel going up because of demand in China. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be building here, but in a city that's impacted by these outside forces?
Well, I believe that that helps us drive the costs down somewhat, because when we buy from some of these, I think we get a better product, and we get a better price.
Because there's so much going on in New York?
Yes, and there's so much, and everyone wants to be here. Everyone wants to sell us something from somewhere, steel from India or China, or and I think that our industries here have suffered as a result in some of the other states of America. But in order to keep prices down, sometimes we have to buy and import from the outside. Everyone wants to be here, so they give you a better price. And sometimes you have no choice but to go there.
Has that been your experience too, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, there will always be increases in steel and certain cement products and whatnot, but that's not really what's driving, in my opinion, the construction cost. What we have right now is a real shortage of management at every level, at the subcontractor level, at the construction manager level, shortage of good architects, good engineers. There's so much work, and there is really just a shortage. 3 trades in particular: concrete foundations, concrete superstructure, and curtain wall, are really experiencing spikes of maybe 30% over the last couple of years. And that really is due to supply and demand. There just aren't enough contractors to do the amount of work that's going on in this town right now.
So if somebody heard you just say that watching our show and said, well, that sounds great, I'd like to get into that business, how would they get started?
You save up $5,000 and you buy a truck and you get going. 25 years later, you'll probably be sitting here with Ken Fisher and Frank Sciame. Actually, I think that you're right. I see so much work. There's so much more work now than was available to me 10 years ago. I do excavation foundation. It's my main thing that I do. So I would think that if you assemble, I think the main thing and what brings is a schedule really that keeps the cost down. If you have a good team, it's really teamwork. It's all about teamwork. If you have a calm owner, if you have good engineer architect team, good surveyor, and a good scheduler, and you start your project on time, like you get into the ground with like in April or May or something, and you get into the ground and you close in before winter, and you do your interior work in the winter, you really have to schedule. I think it's one of the key things, and good construction management, a good project manager. And if we can like take out the ego and the blame and all of that from the work team, and you get a cooperative team, you can keep your prices down. Because change orders is where you skyrocket your prices, and Frank would agree with that. We don't like that word in the industry.
Yeah, no one makes.
What makes a job go sour? When you're in the middle of a project and all of a sudden you realize it's a catastrophe, not, of course, that anything that you'd be responsible for, but when you find yourself in these are complex organisms almost. What causes a job to go bad?
There's so many things that could impact a schedule, and I think that labor, if there's a breakdown in labor, weather, lack of communication with the team, there's so many things, and let Frank speak to that because I know he has more experience than I do.
No, it is a very risky business. I think that there are so many things that could go wrong, starting with a bid. You've got to bid competitively many instances, or if you're a construction manager, the subcontractors will bid competitively. And I think the thing that will cost the job the most money is a sub that goes out of business. And that's one of the things that I'm very concerned about right now, because when it's so busy, there's a tendency for people to become busier than they should be, and defaults would be really, really difficult. It would drive the cost of construction even higher.
So when you're bidding out subcontracts, do you look at just the price, or is it the reputation of the company that's bidding on the work?
We always look at the reputation of the company, the projects that they've built that are similar. And in this particular market, we have to look at what their workload is. Will they be available to put the manpower on the job when we need it? So vetting the subcontractors has become a very, very important aspect of making sure that the project is successful.
We're going to build on our conversation when Citywide continues right after this.
There is really only one boy. One girl. One tree. One forest. One deep, dancing ocean. One mountain calling. One handful of sand through our fingers. One endless sky overhead. And one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups are working together under one name, EarthShare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
Welcome back to Citywide. We're speaking with construction company chief executives Frank Sciame and Dolly Williams. Dolly, in the first segment of the show, you mentioned you get into the business by saving $5,000 and buying a truck, and 25 years later, you've got a business. That's your experience, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about how you got into the construction business.
Well, my family was into the construction business. I should say my ex-husband. And then we were living in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And we decided, coming from families, both of us from farm families and people who were traders and did their own businesses, we were not about to really work. We came to America to experience the American dream. And I think to experience the American dream, you have to be your own boss or have your own business, or at least try. So we had this $5,000 we had saved up to purchase for a down payment on a home. And Carl decided that we should buy a truck with it and start our own business. So that's the way we got a very, very used dump truck that was in good condition. And we started the hauling business. And then the next thing we did was bought a backhoe with the money we made from that business and started A. Williams Trucking and Backhoe Trenching. So we dug trenches and we did a little demolition and we did a little earthwork and mostly trucking. And then a few years later, we realized that we had the potential to do more. And with the help of some small loans from the SBA and with a break from where we were living in the Nehemiah project to do the excavation, we received the contract to do the excavation for 180 homes there, and then subsequently 2,000, which was all of them. And we moved on from there, buying more equipment and investing, then diversifying into doing excavation and foundation, and then later on really diversified into the general construction business. Which brings me to one of the projects which I'm very proud of that we just did, which was the Medgar College Students Building for DASNY. Very successful project in where we employed more than 75% minority subcontractors. We had some hurdles to build this project, but we built it on time and on budget, and with a good construction manager like Turner, it was a successful project.
Is it difficult for minorities, immigrants, and women? Is it easier or more difficult than it was when you were starting?
I wish I can say that it has become easier. I think that the playing field is still not level. I wish we can see more of that. And one of the things that I see happening, which doesn't please me at all, is more and more minority contractors really going out of business. So I think that's the reason for us not seeing a more expansion. And you really cannot find capable, bondable minority contractors to participate in many of the projects. And being frank, and sometimes I think that people want to include and have inclusion, but it's very difficult to find minority contractors sometimes because so many of them are going out of business.
Both of you are very involved with civic activities, sitting on a variety of boards, public, quasi-public, and private. Why is that important to you? What is it? Is it just about business networking? Is it because you feel proprietary about a city that you're helping to shape? Why are you involved with so many organizations?
I think that if you're fortunate enough to succeed, you have a responsibility to give back. And one of the reasons that I joined boards is to try and give back. And what I've gotten back is twofold of what I give. We really, I find at least, there are boards and there are boards, and many of these boards are like my continuing education. You get to deal with smart people with very different attitudes. They'll challenge your decisions, unlike maybe your own company, where what you say goes unchallenged maybe too often. And I just look at it as my continuing education and a great way to give back to the city that's been so good to me.
One of the assignments that you just took on was to take a hard look at the construction program for the World Trade Center Memorial. Talk to us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, well, you know, the standard line that I had is when the governor and the mayor calls, you have no choice. And my wife even bought into that. But I'll tell you, having gone through it, if the president calls, there will be a pause. Assess the minefields before you jump in. But I did jump in. Felt it was something that was very important, the memorial to honor those lost on 9/11. I'm very involved in Lower Manhattan, and we tried to do our best, working with talented people. I can't say enough about everyone, the LMDC, the Port Authority, Bovis, who was the construction manager, Peter Lear, Roland Betts. There was such an outcry of want to get this thing done. Everyone was there, contributing to the process, and in a month we were able to pull in the budget and come up with a compromised plan that didn't please everyone, but certainly I think pleased enough. There was a great consensus about the plan, and as a result the memorial is being built and should be built on schedule by 2009, September 11th.
Let me ask you a follow-up question about Lower Manhattan, the Trade Center site in particular, but from the perspective of a construction executive. You mentioned earlier billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars are going to be spent in that area. It is the oldest part of the city. It has got the narrowest streets. It's got a huge amount of built environment around it, so it's not like Wall Street is going to shut down and move out of the way while you do work there. And at the same time, the whole world is watching because of the terrible tragedy of 9/11, but also because New York is so much in the world media now. So if you're working on a job in Lower Manhattan today, it seems to me it's got to be even more of a pressure cooker than the same job would be, say, if you were doing it in Queens or in the Bronx.
Oh, of course. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that we should, I don't know, I've been thinking about this. I think we should do our schedule, our work day should start at later on in the day, maybe. Not at rush hour. When rush hour finishes, Wall Street and all of that, if you're working in Lower Manhattan, then you should start working the shift at 6 o'clock and go on to 12. Wouldn't that be a good idea?
It's a good idea, Dolly. They have, been thinking about this, and I think it's a real tribute to the planners in the city. There's a construction command center, which is headed by Charlie Makish. He's a very, very well-seasoned construction real estate executive who has taken on this daunting responsibility. And they have come up with ways. There was also the Construction Coordination Act, where you would only dig up the streets once. And given the planning that's going into this, given the leadership of a guy like Charlie Makish, and given the fact that everyone recognized that the logistics and the challenges of building in Lower Manhattan would be great, I think that this is going to be one of the better places to build in this town, because people will be planning, people will be looking ahead. There will be, I think, longer work days, talking about how to get concrete into the city and whatnot.
Is there cooperation from the unions on some of the work rule changes that may be necessary?
Yes. Oh, yes. I think the unions always cooperate, and once you do the right thing by them, and I think that because of coordination, and that's the key when you're doing this, because of coordination, cooperation, and having the good team again is so very important. You can move with it, and you can. If you have good coordination, like Frank said, it is a better place to work than in a place where it's wide open and you have no coordination.
So Dolly, one of the things that you read about in the paper these days is people complaining that there's so much construction going on in their neighborhood or their block that there's, debris, it's noise, it's traffic, the jackhammers are going. When you get ready to start a job and you start thinking about the impact that you're going to have on the immediate neighborhood, on the people who live on that block, what kind of things can you do so that it's not so annoying?
The first thing you do when you get on a site is meet the neighbors. It is absolutely important that you because construction is a noisy project, it's a dusty project, and it impacts the environment, so you have to be friendly with the neighbors. You are going into their neighborhood. They're part of the project, and they are part of the team as far as I'm concerned, always. They're a priority.
Yeah. Well, I think communication is critical. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember the old sign, dig we must, we've had to tell clients, blast we must. So, it is a nature of the operation that it's going to be noisy. But you try to explain to them if there are things that you can do to limit the noise at certain times. If there's a church close by, we once limited construction operations when there were funeral services. They would let us know. Mm-hmm. So there are things you can do to mitigate it, but dig we must, build we must, and noise is part of it.
Now, we heard a little bit about Dolly's background. Frank, you're an architect by training. If a young person came to you today and said, I'm thinking about getting into the construction business, what would you ask them about themselves, and what advice would you give them?
First of all, I'd ask them if they had the optimism of a test pilot, and if they really loved the business. I mean, I think if they loved building, if they were building like myself since they were a little boy, and they really wanted it, it's a great place to be. But you have to love it. You have to really love it to overcome the challenges.
I think you have to be a person with a lot of fortitude and perseverance, and you really have to love challenges. And you have to love taking risks sometimes as well. But it's so gratifying that it's worth being into it.
Well, you mentioned the Medgar Evers project.
Yes.
Very quickly, in addition to that, something that you've done you're really proud of from each of you.
Well,
my office building in Park Slope on 3rd Avenue, I think that buying that piece of property, the land that was vacant for 50 years or so, and buying that and designing and financing and building my office building is the proudest thing that I think I've done.
I would have to say that the Morgan Library was a greatest achievement. It was a building that was going to have great materials. The owner wanted a building that would be as good as the buildings that were built by J.P. Morgan in the early 1900s. And we were working with a great architect in Renzo Piano.
Yes,
and the challenge was to make sure that the construction quality complemented the great design, and I think that we were able to achieve that.
Well, thank you both for helping to build New York. My thanks to Dolly Williams, CEO of A. Williams Construction, and Frank Sciame, CEO of FJ Sciame Construction Company. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us.